Brian Smith here, and welcome to the Dream Path Podcast, where I try to get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. My goal is to demystify and humanize the creative process and make it accessible to everyone. Now let's jump in. Jason Moore.
That's me.
Welcome.
I'm glad to be here, man.
I am glad to see you. I am glad to be in the same room with you.
Me too.
I am really glad to connect with you about this thing we call a podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a pretty cool concept.
It is. It's a Dream Path podcast, man, of course.
Yes, you've heard of it.
I have.
Okay, right on.
It's ingrained in my brain.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, dude, what'd you think of the Neal Preston episode?
Man, what a journey that guy had, huh? Just the job in general of just being a photographer is cool, especially if you have a really deep passion for photography. But to be hired on to shoot the most iconic pictures in rock history, come on.
Dude, it is mind-blowing.
Right?
How many places he has been in the world and the bands that he's traveled with. And not just the bands that he's traveled with, but the access that this guy had. And it's not even just backstage access. I mean, you heard from the interview, he is embedded with these bands.
Uh-huh.
And it was a time when these tours were filled with debauchery and craziness and
massive,
partying.
Just excess. Total
excess. And right before we hit record, you showed me this magazine article about the Led Zeppelin tour and it was a 747 that they bought?
Yeah, it was a 747 they hollowed out and customized and called it the Starship.
Yeah.
And it had a full bar and an organ and copious amounts of cocaine and just, I think whatever you wanted, you had on that plane.
Oh, man. It's just a different era, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. I mean, do you think people even do that anymore or can do that anymore? I mean,
I don't think so. I think it's a different time.
Yeah.
And it's probably a good thing that we're not in that era anymore where there's probably a lot of bad things happening.
Oh, sure.
Objectification of women, sort of the groupie culture, obviously drug overdoses and deaths and a lot of lives ruined.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think that lifestyle really defined the culture, rock culture at the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important part of the culture, whether, without passing judgment on it, I think that was part of the rock scene, and you can't deconstruct it and pull that away and still have the same music.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think it fueled it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to talk to Neal Preston, I mean, first of all, let me tell you how I heard about Neal Preston. I was listening to one of my favorite podcasters, Mark Maron.
Oh, yeah.
WTF a while back. And he was interviewing Neal Preston. And I was like, okay, this guy sounds fascinating. So I listened, of course, to the entire interview and just recently sent him a note and asked him if he'd be interested in talking to me. And he said yes. And I couldn't believe it that he would want to sit down with me and share his story, because the way I approach it is different than Mark Maron. It's two completely different shows. And, his approach, Mark Maron's approach he has a different lens that he looks at the world through. So I think that Neal showing up on my show, you're going to get a different story than you did through Mark. And that's the way it turned out. And we had some personal connections, some common denominators in our lives that made it kind of interesting to,
oh yeah,
with Cameron Crowe being his best friend and my dad introducing me to Cameron Crowe in the mid 80s at that Heart concert. That was a nice connection that we had during the interview. Also, the fact that he met my dad on tour with Heart and knew him. He didn't know him as a friend, but he had run into him. And at the end of the interview said that he would actually look in his archives for pictures of my dad, who is now deceased, by the way.
I hope he can find some.
Me too. I love talking to, everybody I talk to by definition is someone I want to talk to.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a certain degree of excitement, enthusiasm I have for every guest, but Neal Preston was really special for those reasons that I just said, that these personal connections that we had. Plus, I think you and I have just mad respect for the classic rock era.
Oh, yes.
In general, especially like Led Zeppelin, Queen, and Bob Dylan, and all of these folks that he took these iconic photos of, and that you and I grew up listening to, but also seen the same photos that Neal took of these folks and they made their way into Rolling Stone and Billboard magazine. And so they're embedded in our psyche.
Yep.
They're embedded in our musical consciousness. And that's why I loved talking to Neal.
That was great. I mean, I thought that was very sweet of him at the end to offer to look through the archives, the Heart archives that he said are like immense amounts of photographs. And I hope he does find some pictures, even if it's just like him off to the side or by a plane or something. Wouldn't that be cool?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it would. So I'm going to follow up with him on that.
Right on.
Yeah. And another great thing about the interview with Neal is he is a storyteller.
Oh yeah.
Not only does he have these stories of every photograph and how every photograph in the book Exhilarated and Exhausted came about.
Yeah.
But he has these stories that he shared on the podcast that may have never been shared on any other podcast before.
That's true.
You know, and to listen to those stories from a guy that's been in the business for over 50 years is a real privilege.
Yeah. And he had a Queen book come out last week. So, I mean, if you're a fan.
I have ordered the book.
Good.
Yeah. So when it gets here, I'll share it with you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And not to just be a plug on Led Zeppelin, but if you guys want to check out Music Spotlights magazine, they have a tribute to Led Zeppelin. And it's a really good, shows pictures of the plane, inside the plane. That's why I brought it to show Bryan today.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was so fun. Hopefully we can continue the momentum that we have in talking to these great guests and putting together these shows that are so exciting. And I think they're really going to resonate with listeners.
Right. Me too.
So, Jason, moving on to what you and I are watching and paying attention to, you told me about a documentary that you saw called Grass is Greener on Netflix.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And I watched it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I watched it last night.
What'd you think?
It was, I think it tried to accomplish a lot and it succeeded. You know, it really tried to capture the history of cannabis as it relates to music.
Right. That's why I watched it. Yeah.
Yeah. The jazz music culture.
Oh,
and then it takes you all the way through the criminalization and the propaganda that occurred within our government about marijuana. What I thought was fascinating, and it's a pretty wide ranging documentary, it covers a lot of different topics. What I found fascinating is how the government moved from calling it cannabis to marijuana, specifically to associate it with the Hispanic culture.
Yep. To
get it away from this is a white man's drug,
right,
and to try to make it an ethnic drug. And it's a propaganda move that is pretty insidious.
It is.
In our government. And I did not know that about marijuana. There's a lot of things you learn about marijuana in this documentary and also the issues that surround marijuana. But I liked, listening to Bob Marley's music throughout the documentary and hearing from hip hop artists, and Snoop Dogg especially.
Oh yeah,
was pretty poignant.
It was pretty baked the whole time, wasn't it?
Snoop is, he's entertaining to hear. It doesn't really matter what the context is. If you put Snoop on a TV screen, he's going to say something pretty funny and profound.
Oh yeah.
And I thought it was hilarious when he talked about, he's like, yeah, you put 1,000 guys in a room that don't like each other and give them marijuana, and within minutes they're taking selfies with each other.
Yeah.
He says he put 4 motherfuckers that don't like each other in a room and give them 1 glass of alcohol, and somebody's going to be dead. And he said it a lot more poignantly than I did.
It's true. What I loved about it, just right off the bat, talking about jazz music, I had no idea that the term jive was referring to pot.
I didn't either.
I mean, they talk about the Reefer Man, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington,
right?
Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and how Louis Armstrong petitioned the government to be allowed to smoke marijuana because it was part of his craft.
Yeah, and he got arrested outside of a club.
He did.
Yeah, I had no idea that was happening in the jazz scene.
Well, you had was it the director of the FBI back then? I think it was Harry. Do you remember his name?
No.
Allsinger, or
I forget.
Anyway, he was the one that made it that black people smoke pot and go crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, and all of this other racial stuff that they tried to pin on black people and Hispanic people to make it about race. And that's how they got it criminalized.
Well, and it's not just something that happened in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Right.
And they talked about it in the documentary with Trayvon Martin.
That's right.
And I believe wholeheartedly that George Zimmerman should have been convicted for murder, for killing Trayvon Martin.
I do too.
But it was interesting in the documentary to hear how folks introduced evidence or tried to introduce evidence of Trayvon having marijuana in his system as some type of a defense for George Zimmerman.
It's crazy.
It's nuts.
That's not even close to true.
I mean, anybody who knows anything about marijuana and the effects psychologically and physically on folks who smoke it know that marijuana does not make you aggressive.
No.
If anything, it has the opposite effect.
One of the things, like the thing that you said that Snoop Dogg said, one of the things I've always heard, you put 4 guys together in a room with alcohol and they'll beat each other up. You put 4 guys together in a room with marijuana and they'll form a band.
Right. Yeah, it's another way of putting it.
You know?
Right.
I've never seen anybody get aggressive on marijuana. Never.
So it was pretty illuminating to see that discussion on the documentary, and I think it's an important one. It's not necessarily the most well-known documentary because there's so many out there, but it's nice that you have folks like Snoop that are on camera talking about it because he knows better than anybody. I mean, he used to deal drugs.
Right.
He knows what drugs are dangerous and which ones are going to bring people together, or at least be non-violent, or drugs that are not going to contribute to violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marijuana is definitely one of those.
Well, I think we're seeing what we're seeing nationally, and we have over the last 10 years, is a decriminalization at the state level in various states, but we're still not seeing it happen federally. And I think that's going to be important to be able to move past the stigmatization that we're seeing with marijuana and really move on to more important issues. And also pardon and commute sentences of folks that have been serving time for marijuana charges.
Yeah, many years.
It's ridiculous.
Some of them have been in jail for decades.
And it's disproportionately affecting people of color, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for suggesting that documentary to me, Jason.
Well, I knew you'd like it.
What I've been watching lately is, I've been watching a few things on Netflix lately. One of them is Dave Letterman's newest season of interviews.
Oh, I haven't watched the new stuff, but I do like that show.
Yeah, the first season that came out, I thought it was a little rough.
Yeah.
I don't know that he knew exactly what the show was or what it was supposed to be. I think Dave Letterman is fantastic as a talk show host. And in fact, my first memories of talk shows were Johnny Carson, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a TV in my room. I probably shouldn't have had a TV in my room when I was a young kid, grade school and junior high and high school. But I had a television in my room. And one of the things I would do every weeknight, every school night, was watch Johnny Carson and Dave Letterman.
Yeah.
And hands down, Dave Letterman, I always felt was the most relevant and talented person. Not to disparage Johnny Carson, but he was a little before my time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, the Ed McMahon sidekick thing, and it was more of an older person's show, I thought.
It was.
But Dave Letterman, the fact that it came on at 12:30 and not 11:30, it was almost like this show that was like a forbidden show, and hardly any of my friends were watching it because it was on too late. But I loved comedy. I loved television stars, film stars, musicians. All of the folks that he featured were really formative for me in terms of like the worldview that I had and the folks that I listened to and looked up to. And I remember laughing harder at Dave Letterman than I've ever laughed at any other television show up to that point.
Right.
Consistently. And there was a time when he was on NBC and then he went to CBS. Is that okay? So when he was on NBC, Dave Letterman had a monkey on the show.
Oh, yeah.
Or 2 monkeys.
Yeah.
Okay. This might be on YouTube somewhere. I'm not sure. But he had 2 monkeys, and then the idea was that it was a tea party.
Oh, I kind of remember.
Do you remember that?
Something like that.
And I don't know why this guest was on there, but she trained these monkeys to have a tea party. And then Dave Letterman got too close to one of the monkeys and it tried to bite him.
Right.
And the way that he could impromptu turn a situation like that into something outrageously funny. And still to this day, I'm thinking about it. Like I'm still laughing out loud, thinking about these moments on his show. So that's a long way of saying I love David Letterman. And during his first season on Netflix, I wasn't impressed. I mean, it was good. It was good stuff, but I don't know if he was trying to do a podcast that was filmed, and it was some of it was kind of produced and then it would have flashbacks to other footage in the middle of it. And I was like, what is going on here? I don't even know that the producers really know what's going on. I watched it and I enjoyed it. But this next season, this last season that I've been watching, I watched the Dave Chappelle interview.
Oh, wow.
And it is great. Dave Chappelle is, I think, one of the top comedians over the last 20 years.
Yeah, he's up there.
He's right up there. He might be the best in terms of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I love, because I'm a trial lawyer, I love watching people that are really good at telling stories. Because that's what we do as trial lawyers.
Yeah.
We have to get up in front of a jury. We have to tell a story. Let me tell you a story about my client. Or let me tell you about the person we're suing. You know, that type of thing. And it's difficult. It's tough to hold people's attention. It's difficult to sequence events. And how do you tell the story? How do you discover the story? And Dave Letterman is a master at this. And so is Dave Chappelle. So to see those two get together, and for Dave to pull the story out of Dave Chappelle in this context was something to behold.
Right.
So you should, if you like Dave Chappelle, watch it. But he also interviews Lizzo and Kim Kardashian. And I think in the prior season, he had some pretty famous guests on there.
Barack Obama was one.
Barack Obama, of course. Yeah. Tina Fey, I think, was one of them. But yeah, they're not all fantastic, but this Dave Chappelle episode was great.
I'll tell you about my experience with David Letterman. I was a lot like you in that I had a TV in my room when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I watched things late at night when I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah.
But I started watching Letterman, I think, when I was about 13 or 14. So 83, 84.
That's about about the time frame.
I just remember he had this thing where he'd drop stuff off of a building to watch it explode.
Oh, the watermelons.
Watermelons and light bulbs. And I thought that was great. He had the monkey cam.
Uh-huh.
If you remember.
Yeah, the monkey would go throughout with
the camera on it.
Yeah, the hallways and the audience and everything.
And the whirling bowl of chili. I mean, he would film things that were going fast and slow them down. Instant replay.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
That kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
And he had like the bookmobile. I don't know if you remember the bookmobile.
What was the bookmobile?
Gus was driving the bookmobile, and this lady would talk about books that they're reviewing, like fake books.
Oh, okay. I'll have to go back and look at some of that on YouTube.
It's all kind of coming back to me now, just different flashes of it. But he had some really great guests back then. And so he had awesome bands. I think that was the first time I ever heard of Stone Temple Pilots. And he had Eddie Van Halen would guest on there once in a while. It was good times.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they had some type of way to watch old Dave Letterman episodes, especially the NBC versions.
Yeah. Oh, do you remember when he messed with Bryant Gumbel and the Today Show people were filming outside Rockefeller Plaza?
Oh, that's right. He would do that.
He'd go with a bullhorn and mess with them while they were shooting live.
Yeah, he was such a genius. He still is a genius.
Yeah.
But I think he left at the right time.
Yeah.
The way that he left was appropriate and classy. And, I think you have to leave when you're still at your peak.
Yeah.
Rather than like, oh, you know what? This guy should probably think about retiring.
Right. Yeah.
That's what he did.
He did.
Yeah. So recently, Jason, we interviewed someone, you may have heard of him, a little known act named Don McLean.
Little known act.
He sang this song, didn't make it very far, American Pie.
No, I never heard of it.
Okay. Well, it's a guy that I was intimidated to talk to.
Mm.
And I'm glad I finally was able to connect with him. And that interview is in the can, and hasn't been edited yet. So as you go into the editing process for this interview, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, make it sound as good as I can. I want it to sound good. I want people to be able to understand what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to treat it necessarily any more special. I want it to be as good as the others.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to be careful in that I don't, mess it up in any kind of way, because this is a special interview.
Yeah.
Don McLean is a fixture in American folk rock history, American Pie and Vincent. And to me, I grew up, my dad played that song all the time. He has the album. Mm-hmm. And so I remember hearing that from a very young age, and it's been stuck in my mind. And of course, people have been ripping that song apart for decades, trying to figure out what everything means. And you'll never get that information out of Don, but there are people that have pretty much dissected that song pretty well. And I think if you go through, you can figure it out pretty easily.
Yeah, it was nice to talk to someone that iconic and realize, just like I do with all of the guests that I talk to, that he is, at the end of the day, a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And he's no different than any of us. except for the choices that he made and the journey that he took
Right.
intentionally. And that's what we all have in our lives is we have these crossroads and we have these decisions to make about risks that we want to take. What is the risk tolerance that we have for going certain directions in life?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about Don McLean's interview in a recap after it's launched. And I'm not sure when it's going to launch yet. But one of the things that impressed me about Don was that he did take chances at a very young age. And he just threw himself into the folk music scene, even though he had a completely reasonable path as an academic. You know, he could have gone, finished the college route, and he did. He got a degree at, going to night school as he was performing and becoming a professional musician and songwriter. But really what he chose was the harder path.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy to make a living, not just make a living out of music, but make an impact the way he did musically, that has reverberated and is still every bit as valid today as it was 50 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Which is this American Pie song was voted just recently as one of the top 5 songs in American culture in terms of defining who we are musically.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, the song's basically a history lesson. You got to go back and look at it from the beginning and what they talk about. And of course, Buddy Holly, that's kind of what the reference is, the passing of Buddy Holly in February of 59. So
the day the music died.
Day the music died. Yeah.
So that'll be fun to hear how that shapes up in the editing process.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Who do we have coming up next, Jason?
We have an interview with Kylie Rothfied.
Another musician.
Yeah.
She is a musician that I met down in Marina del Rey when she was performing one night. And I go into on the episode how we met specifically and how that resulted in this interview taking place.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really cool how little connections like that can result in interviews down the road.
Right.
And she was on The Voice. She was picked by Alicia Keys.
Nice.
To perform on The Voice. And also she was on a show called Songland in season 2, which is basically a reality TV show for songwriters who are trying to compete for a record contract, basically. And
cool.
She was so fun to talk to because she's kind of on the upward trajectory as opposed to Don McLean, who has had 50 years of iconic influence within the music culture. But he's definitely sort of on the tail end of his career as opposed to Kylie, who is in her 20s. And she's really making an impact and is continuing on an upward trajectory. So to talk to musicians who are in a different part of their career, I think is fun, and it provides a little diversity in terms of the folks who we're talking to about music and how to make it in the industry. She's a wonderful musician. If you follow her on Instagram, you'll see that she's very bluesy. She's got a blues influence, and she has this voice that's kind of bluesy.
Yeah.
But also has this pop sensibility too. So she has great flexibility and sort of crossover potential to become a pop artist, even though I think her roots are in blues.
Blues and folk, yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at the fact that she plays Epiphones and is sponsored by Epiphone, means that she's got some blues credentials.
And she loves those hollow body too, or semi-hollow body guitars.
Right. She's also classically trained. She went to Berklee College of Music. So she has a lot of street cred in terms of like having this foundation of music in an academic setting, but also working in Nashville, writing songs in Nashville, writing songs in Los Angeles, performing on Songland, performing on The Voice, having connections like Alicia Keys. So this is someone that is really creating little communities and support systems around her. These are folks that are going to help her become fully realized as an artist.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe it.
So that's coming out next week. And Jason, as always, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Bryan.
All right, brother. Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the handle @DreamPathPod. And as always, go find your dream path.